Welcome everyone to our studies in GCSE history, specifically looking at the Tsardom and Communism topic. This lesson is going to talk about the economy and society under the reign of Nicholas II. So this is what the specification looks like. Highlighted in red is what we're going to be exploring in this lesson. We'll be talking about a number of different economic developments that take place under the reign of Nicholas II. This involves specifically an examination of this idea known as industrialization. We're going to talk about agriculture, so things like farming, and then we will talk about the extent to which there was economic growth. So whereas we'll be talking in the first two sections on the two main areas of an economy, essentially, looking firstly at the industrial side of an economy versus the agricultural side of an economy, the final section in this lesson is going to talk about the extent to which the economy actually grew. Did it grow? Did it develop? Was there any growth and development during the reign of Nicholas II, who is pictured there being coronated in that image above us? So let's begin then with this idea known as industrialization. So when we think about looking at the economy and society, we can't really delineate, we can't really separate the relationship, the interrelationship that exists between the economy and within society. Society, of course, refers to the people who live in the Russian Empire at the time, and it refers to the sort of social aspects of the Russian Empire, the culture, the people, the languages, the class system, all of this kind of thing. And you can't really detach that from the economy. You can't really attach that from the ways in which the economy operated when looking at the Russian Empire, the reign of Nicholas II, and subsequent videos. What we'll do when we look at the Russian Revolution, when we look at the Russian Civil War, we look at the impact of Joseph Stalin. The Prime Minister of Russia, who was Sergei Witte, believed that revolutionary and social unrest could be alleviated through the strength of industrialization. So remember, there's a lot of seemingly revolutionary and quite a lot of social unrest, quite a lot of protest, quite a lot of striking that's taking place in the Russian Empire during this time. And Witte believes that one of the ways in which you can alleviate this and to make society a bit better, therefore, is through using industrialization and through strengthening your economy through industrialization. And so as a result of which, there was lots of heavy focus on industrialization during the reign of Nicholas II himself. So we see that there are a number of economic policies that are implemented to essentially create and to grow the industry in the Russian economy. There was the raising of interest rates. What this did was essentially encourage people to invest from abroad, because essentially an interest rate refers to the rate of which there'll be charges back on things like savings and on loans and on things like that. So theoretically, if you loan if I was to loan some money to you, and I was to do so with a yearly 4% interest rate, that means that for every year that you're paying that loan back, there is 4% added on to that, such that when you finish paying the loan, I actually make a little bit more in return. That's what an interest rate is. And when you raise interest rates, it means that those who actually loan money, those who actually give money, let people borrow their money, are able to gain more money back in interest, which obviously then encourages those people to loan more money. So this is where we see more foreign investment and foreign loans come into the Russian economy, because they were incentivized to do so owing to the interest rates. In 1897, we see, for example, the issuance of a new currency. We see the issuance of a new ruble. This also had a benefit of being able to stabilize the currency, to maintain quite a strong value on that currency as well, which also encourages people to invest and to trade using this new currency, using the ruble, in a similar sense that the Great British Pound or the American dollar are very valuable currencies in the world today. We also see that foreign capital is raised in order to fund industrial projects. So the foreign capital, the foreign investment, the money that's coming from abroad, as a result partially of the interest rates, is being used to fund industrial projects. This is things like in developing railways and developing industry. The prioritization that there was on heavy industry rather than light industry. So things like coal and steel and this kind of thing. The result of this was that by 1914, there was the establishment of a further 62,000 kilometers of railway track. This actually represented the second largest railroad system in the world. One element of this was the Trans-Siberian Railway. The Trans-Siberian Railway, for those who don't know, links essentially Europe to the Far East. It goes all the way across Russia and into Siberia, and I believe now it goes down into China and through Mongolia and these kind of places. This is the longest railway journey in the world, still is to this day, and what this railway development did was stimulate heavy industry, because not only did it require a lot of heavy industry in order to actually build this railway, obviously, as you would imagine, but it also meant that there was lower transportation costs for other parts of the economy to essentially link up with other parts of the country. So you could now take the Trans-Siberian Railway and go all the way from Siberia to the more western part of the Russian Empire. On the other hand, however, there was not complete perfection in regards to the growth and results of industrialization. So even though there was clearly a growth in industrialization, there was clearly an industrial revolution that was taking place, the cost of this industrial revolution was very, very high. The result of which was that the Russian Empire was incredibly dependent on foreign investment. The problem here is that when you encourage lots of foreign investment, that's great. It means that you have lots of money to do all your industrial projects and building and all this kind of thing. But then the result is that now you are dependent on having to pay back all of those loans. All of those loans, which of course have high interest rates, which of course makes it even more difficult for you to pay them back. In terms of some statistics, therefore, for example, there was a 10 times increase in foreign investment under Nicholas II as the result of these industrialization projects. So we can see that there's some pros and some cons to the industrialization process that we see. We see that industrialization clearly happened, and that industrialization clearly led to stronger economic growth in the same sense that industrialization did for every single economy that went through this process. However, there was still some problematic elements to it, specifically the fact that there was a heavy reliance on foreign investment in the industrialization projects, which meant that there was therefore quite a lot of debt that the Russian Empire had to pay off. By contrast then, let's think about agricultural developments instead. The agriculture was still a very big part of the development of the Russian economy. It was still a major area of underdevelopment, however. So on the one hand, you have industry, which is things like, things like factories and things like railways, steel, coal, iron, all these kinds of things. Agriculture, of course, refers to farming practices. This is the other part of the economy. Nicholas was actually keen to implement some major reforms to implement for the changes to the agriculture. So, for example, redemption payments were abolished in 1907. Essentially, what this meant was that peasants were more free to leave their villages. For those of you who don't know, under a previous Tsar, there was the emancipation of the serfs. There was the abolition of something known as serfdom, which was a sort of type of slavery whereby peasants were forced to stay in a particular part of a country or under the ownership of a particular individual. And so as a result of which there was no movement of a peasantry. The edict in the late 1800s led to the abolition of serfdom. Which was, of course, a very, very huge and quite major significant development in Russian history. But it was still something that had some long-lasting implications. Not necessarily negative implications, but some long-lasting implications. A new peasant land bank, in fact, was built in order to establish purchasers. This was essentially able to allow for the peasantry, who obviously would be more likely to be working in the agricultural sector, to make purchasers using this new banking system. In addition to this, there was the encouragement of settlement in Siberia. So, for those of you who don't know, Russia is a very, very big country. The Russian Empire, as it existed during the reign of Nicholas II, was also very big, even bigger than it is now, arguably. And most of the population of Russia lives in the West. They live in cities like Moscow. They live in cities like St. Petersburg, and essentially, the further east you go, the more into Siberia you go, the less settlement there was. However, government subsidies were introduced in order to essentially try and encourage the settlement of people in Siberia. Now, the reason why Siberia is not a particularly nice place to live is because it's very cold, it's very barren, there isn't exactly the greatest fertile conditions for agriculture. But it's not impossible in some areas, and it's not impossible to make a living in Siberia. It's just a little bit more difficult. With all this being said then, what were the results? What was the impact of the agricultural developments? Well, when it came to peasant land ownership, the extent to which peasants actually owned property, this actually increased from 20% to 50% by 1915, a significant increase. Grain production also rose annually, making Russia the greatest grain producers in the world by 1909. And as a result of this as well, there was a further 3.5 million peasants who had moved from Siberia and therefore created a large agricultural region.